Hello, Namaskar, welcome to my pod, the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis. My name is Juggi Bhasin. To become a subscriber, all you have to do is to press that red button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free. Would also really appreciate if you could like this video and share this video with your friends. All right. India-US relationship. What is going wrong? Because there was a time when everybody said that this would be the defining relationship of the century. This was a relationship, in the words of our Prime Minister, Indian Prime Minister, was going to be a relationship which was worth almost $500 billion at some point in time. But the fact of the matter is that things are going from bad to worse. Not a day passes when there is not some sniping which happens, especially from the American side. The Indians are, of course, much more restrained in their pronouncements. The trade deal is stuck, as we all know. The 50% tariffs are still in place. And worse could follow, that there is now talk of a new bill where 500% tariffs could be imposed on India, which of course will have an effect on the Indian economy, whether we would like to accept it or not. All that is in the air. The whole relationship, actually, if you ask me, is up in the air. What has really gone wrong? I'm going to try and find out the reasons for that. I'm going to understand it maybe from the American point of view first, then I'm going to understand it from the Indian point of view, and then I'm going to see if there are any commonalities which are left, if there is some hope for the future, is there some way that this relationship can be resurrected. All that I'm going to try and do in this podcast. But let's start right from the beginning. The American president, why the American president who's been in office for almost a year now, why has he almost in a way done an about turn vis-a-vis India? Why has this relationship completely gone sour? And the reason for that is that you have to understand where this new American president, well, he's about 1 year old in a certain sense, in the office. Where is he coming from? He's coming from, and I'm using this word very deliberately, he's coming from a sea of pain, from trauma, from a situation which nobody would like. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about what all happened to him when he was out of power. When the Democrats in the US, they went after him. All kinds of cases were piled against him. He was made to do humiliated in courts. He was made to do these court appearances, sentences of, there were these talk of suspended sentences and other things would be imposed upon him. It was not only, I would say, personal humiliation for him, but it was also really a huge setback for his party. And therefore, when I say that this president actually comes from a sea, or he crossed a sea of pain to become the president of the United States, then I'm not entirely wrong. And therefore, people who come from trauma, they not only blame the people who have inflicted that trauma on them, but they blame the entire ecosystem around that trauma. And the ecosystem is not necessarily only the ecosystem which exists in the United States, but I'm talking of the ecosystem even outside the US. For instance, there was, even early on, this president was coming with an agenda, a completely volte-face, a completely 180 degrees turn, a new kind of an agenda which nobody even thought that he would go that far, in terms of the tariff war, in terms of the tariff structures, in terms of penalties, in terms of costs he would impose, in terms of asserting the might of the United States. It was always the most powerful country in the world, but he asserted it in such a way, and that is why very early on, if you remember, he put his full attention on the armed forces of the US, where he cleansed it of all the DEI, the woke elements and everything, to try and make it a more stronger military, a military which would be more amenable to what his vision, his foresight was. So very early on, the indications or straws were in the wind that something different was about to happen, which it did happen. And India was, of course, targeted very early on. If you remember, there was talk of India as tariff king right after a few days of the new president taking over, which was so surprising because everybody thought that we would pick off our Prime Minister would pick off from the days of, when they were holding hands, walking that stadium in Houston, and there was talk of Ab Ki Baar, Trump Sarkar, and all that. And everybody thought the relationship would be the defining relationship of the century, but nothing of that sort happened. Notice was given to India very, very early on. And then, if you remember, even though our Prime Minister was among the first of the world leaders to meet this president, but there was something significant which happened even in that meeting, which I don't know, for some reason was not reported very properly. It's usually not obligatory, but it is customary for the head of the country which invites you, that you come to the porch and you meet the approaching head of state. But if you remember, this new president of the United States, he did not do that. Our Prime Minister was not escorted by him personally inside the White House. There was some staffer who took our Prime Minister in, and that should have set the alarm bells ringing. That something was off, something was not particularly right. Even though the meeting inside was fairly okay, and there was all this talk of $500 billion relationship and all that. But the notice was served to India very, very early on that this administration is going to try completely new things. They would be approaching a new end, and all this talk of friendship and all that was fine. It was all there. But the fact is, the relationship was going to be very hard-nosed. It was going to be different. It was going to be very, very transactional. It was absolutely clear from that point onwards. And then, of course, we all know the tariff structures. Then the neocons entered the picture, and the Russian oil became an issue. 50% tariffs were imposed on us. And since that time, it has been going from bad to worse. There has been some back and forth. And then, of course, the clincher, the real clincher to my mind, it is not so much the tariffs, it is not so much the fact that the agricultural produce of we would be unwilling to compromise on those issues as it has been made out to be. These are, of course, very important issues. But I think the real clincher, the real deal breaker really was the entry of Pakistan, especially of Asim Munir, into the equation. Because all this talk of, that the trade deal was ready and it was ready to be signed, but our Prime Minister did not call. He, of course, could not call on the 8th of June, which, if the timeline is correct, because the Operation Sindoor thing was right on our heads at that point in time. But I think what really was the deal breaker was that I think the President of the US wanted, he wanted a photo op where he would be right in the middle. There would be Asim Munir maybe on his left or his right side, and our Prime Minister on the other side. This was completely unacceptable to our Prime Minister, for that matter, to the country. It can never happen, But no, the President of I think the US was insistent. He was almost not hopeful, but he was absolutely sure it would happen, because it would give him a very, very early on this fantastic kind of a public relations victory all over the world. And look, I have achieved this ceasefire. I didn't, of course, stop the president from talking about the fact that he had affected the ceasefire, but I think that was the clincher. That was the real deal breaker which happened so early on. So what really happened was then, therefore, to just sum it up, trauma, the president emerges from a trauma. He blames not only the present people who inflicted a trauma on us, but the entire ecosystem, which includes so many countries in the world, including countries like India, which he called the tariff king. Then that led to restructuring. It led to a restructuring of the economic agenda, of the military agenda, in terms of the priorities of the United States. If you remember early on, the Gulf of Mexico was changed to the Gulf of America. Notice was given that the Monroe Doctrine is going to be affected. This is our backyard. Latin America, South America, Central America, all these, they would be this thing, and it would extend right up to the North Atlantic. That notice was given early on. And even though there was talk at that time that this president would shift focus back to the US and to the Western Hemisphere, but the fact is, make no mistake about it, the idea was also to put Russia and China in their place, put India in their place, stop BRICS at any cost, and above all, the objective of the US was dollar supremacy, that the supremacy of the dollar had to be kept at any cost. And all this while, as the pronouncements were made on a daily basis, the countries were, the countries did not know how to react. All countries in the world, Europe, I'm talking of even Russia, even China, India, everybody it was like hit with a shock wave, shock and awe tactics. What was going on with America, what it was trying to do. As I said, this president tried to fix the armed forces. The DEI woke agenda was completely cleansed of the army. The armed forces were made ready. Now we know what they were being made ready for. And therefore, the idea really was to establish, there was this film long back called The Bone Supremacy. It was the presidential supremacy which was being established, that this president would be like an emperor or a king of the world, where he would call the shots, where he would dictate things, and the rest of the world would have to acknowledge and had to follow. Because in the old days, if you remember, emperors and kings, they used to demand not only loyalty, but they used to demand, there's a word called tithes, T-I-T-H-E-S. They used to demand not only acknowledgement, but monies, levies, it was that kind of a system. People are talking of 18th century, 19th century American imperialism. I'm talking of that this was a system which went back even further, that you would have to appease the Americans, you would have to pay money literally to be in the good books of the Americans, whether through tariffs or whether through deals or trade deals or whatever. And all this was, when it was going on, the pressure was mounting on India. The 50% tariffs were slapped. The idea was to completely subjugate India. And what did India do? I've talked of the American position. I've talked of the fact that this president, he was, as I said, came from trauma. He was absolutely hell-bent on restructuring the world order to that extent. And what did India do around this time? India did what India under this Prime Minister does best. It did not change course. India held steady. While the rest of the world was panicking, there was a lot of people say, this very hasty deal between the United States and the European Union, between Japan and between the US. And all kinds of tariffs were imposed on these countries. Pledges were taken of how many billions and billions of dollars would be invested in the US. Whether it happens or not, it's a different story altogether. But all that was happening. What did India do? India did not budge. India was, of course, very keen to have the trade deal, but it flatly refused to allow access of agricultural products, commodities, because dairy and all these factors, we know about all that. But on a larger perspective, suddenly this friendship, this relationship between our Prime Minister and the President had completely cooled off. It had vaporized into thin air, as it were. There were, of course, some phone calls which were made in between, about 7 to 8 phone calls which were made. But then everybody knew that this was just, this is just some kind of little bit of icing. The cake actually was not tasting well at all. And things had started going really downhill. And then, of course, the H-1B crisis, as we know, the changing of all the H-1B rules, and the fact that the subtle targeting of Indians in the US by that time had also started. Why all this was really happening was because, and it was really shocking and surprising, because Indians have been not only the most entrenched, well qualified, among the highest, in fact, the highest earning community in the US. They've already kept their heads down. All that was there. But all that had changed because the president of the US was not getting the kind of signals, the kind of acknowledgement, the kind of kowtowing that an inferior person or a person who is subjugated does to a superior person, vis-a-vis our Prime Minister and the President. India was holding back. India was not hedging its bets so much. Of course, the SEO summit and all that, people think it's for hedging its bets, but this is what we do. We had retreated into what India is famous for: quiet diplomacy, restrained diplomacy, a stodgy kind of a diplomacy, not addressing the fast track, the fast food. I call it the fast food culture of the US. The fast food in the sense is, I'm not talking of McDonald's or Domino's pizzas. I'm talking of the fast diplomatic push which this president has given. Every day is a new day in terms of policy announcements, in terms of a reality show in front of the world media, the American media. We were not reacting to all that. We were still going around cautiously. If we were disagreeing, then we were quietly, subtly disagreeing. But what India really was doing in all this while was that India was showing to the US that we have the capacity to hold out. That is what really was happening. And I think it was irritating the Americans, the American administration, knowing the way India was holding on. It was not reacting, especially the provocations which are coming vis-a-vis Asim Munir, Pakistan, all this love which was suddenly discovered for Pakistan. And on that issue, let me give a caveat that in that sense, what this president of the US has really done, that he has, in a sense, brought back the old culture of the US in terms of a lot of people don't understand this, but the US generals, the US army has always been fond of Pakistan. They get along very well with the Pakistani generals. And despite this talk of strategic special relationship with India and all that, but the real strategic special relationship was actually, in the real sense, in the real world, was actually being affected, was actually being, nurtured with Pakistan. And the galling thing, of course, for us was that immediately after Operation Sindoor, Asim Munir was being feted and felicitated in the White House. That, of course, was, as we said, we kept quiet about it. We did not make too much of a noise about it because we knew the trade deal was hanging in the balance. The tariffs had been imposed upon us. But the fact is, India stuck to its gun, its stodgy, old world diplomacy, its way of doing things. And in hindsight, it can be argued that probably this was the right thing to do, because if he had reacted, if the Prime Minister had reacted to the daily provocations coming in from the American side, things would have absolutely, completely had been scrambled by now to the point of no return. And therefore, what I'm really saying is that at one level, the US had started following this policy of reward and punishment, reward those people who would accept the presidential supremacy, the people who would bow down, kowtow to the American president, to his whims and demands, to his tariffs, to, as they say, you in front of the emperor or the king, you play the tithis, in Hindi we call chadhawa, you give it, you do all that. Excuse me. You do all that. So all that was not being done by India. India was moving cautiously. It was putting forward its case in a very sober, mature, in its old stodgy diplomatic manner, and therefore India doubled down in that sense. And therefore, if I were to describe the approach of India, then it would be what I call the patience of the long distance warrior, thinker and strategist. That is what India has really, really done. So that is where India was coming from. That is where the situation is right now. And so therefore, what does it mean for India-US relations? Are they going to be, they're going to take even a further tumble? Have we touched the rock bottom of this relationship? Is there some way still further to go? Or is it being resurrected? Is something coming back? Even today, as I'm doing this podcast, there is now news which is coming in, and I have to verify this news, that the new ambassador of the US ambassador to India, that is Sergio Agor, he has made statements that India would be part of the Silica Pax group. India is going to be part of the critical minerals group, and that the relationship is one of the most important relationships of the century. He has made those statements. And yes, people are disagreeing, but there are disagreements, but so what? We are moving forward, which is very, very hopeful. But how much of these pronouncements are going to translate into actual reality remains to be seen. But what is really happening right now, we have entered into a very, very new, interesting phase. And let's talk a little bit of this new, interesting phase. As I said, this 1 year, the president of the US took this 1 year to restructure, maybe to remobilize the most powerful armed forces in the world, which of course are with the United States. And therefore we saw glimpses of that in the action that was taken against Tehran when the B-2 bombers dropped the bunker buster on the nuclear facility in Iran. We saw what happened in Venezuela when all kinds of weapons, including some sonic boom weapons, and immobilizing the tech weapons. This is actually, in a certain sense, if you think about it, it's the modern day 21st century 2026 interpretation of, in the old days we used to call it gunboat diplomacy. This is that new version tech gunboat diplomacy of the US, where it is asserting its might. It is, some people would say it is moving like a predator or even like a pirate. Some would say the pirates of the Caribbean. All kinds of theories are being used to control Central America, Latin America, extending right up to the North Atlantic. And the ultimate idea really, as I said in the beginning, was that you not only subjugate the weaker enemies, you start with the weaker enemies really, but eventually what you really do is you encircle the larger enemies, and the larger enemies have to be Russia and China. Whether the US can keep pretending that we don't care about China or whatever, but the fact is China will be the biggest threat to the US. To effect change from within, look at the way they're doing it in Iran right now. The change in Iran, if it happens, is going to come from within. And if it happens from within, then obviously it's going to be complemented by the US from the external side, from the outside, with the help of Israel, of course. So the idea really is to immobilize the powerful regimes from within. And then when the situation is right, when the regimes are tottering, big, small, middle size, whatever, then you go for the decapitation strike. That is the strategy of the new America right now, of the new administration of the president of the US, what really the change they want to effect. A lot of people fear that this is a distraction from the economic problems at home. Things could change in the midterm elections, but that's really far away. That is really not really our concern. We have to be concerned, as far as India is concerned, that the relationship right now is frigid. Something needs to be done to warm up this relationship. Whether it is Sir Joy Gore, the new ambassador, who might just play a constructive role, who knows? Whether it is some kind of suddenly a breakthrough initiative between the president and our prime minister, who knows? We are, of course, in our old, stodgy, mature manner. We are proceeding with our FTAs, with our deals. We have done it with so many different countries, with Britain, New Zealand, Oman. The deal with the European Union is almost finalized. The German Chancellor is here. The French President is coming next month. The Polish Prime Minister is also coming. Europe is engaging with us. And now there is talk that Europe could be disengaging its trade deal with the US. So the US also... So really, the other thing you have to remember in this engagement between both sides is this, that I think this President of the US, he might not say it, but he will respect a tough competitor. And remember, take your mind back to the way he respected the president of North Korea. Not only because North Korea had the missiles which could reach mainland America, but because of the fact that that man, for all we might think about North Korea or whatever, but he held out, he stood his ground. So I think this president of the US, he respects toughness. And India, in its own very unique, totally unique, in a very Indian way, in which nobody actually can ever do. No other country in the world does it the way we do it. Has shown toughness. People say, oh, we have been too restrained, we should have given it back to the Americans, we should have spoken to them, which is a complete rubbish and nonsense if you ask me. This is the right way to do it, because in this way, not only are you hanging out, not only you are standing your ground, but you are actually telling the other side that you are a very tough adversary if it comes to that. You're a tough partner, you are ready to be friends, but you're not going to accept anything which is thrown at you. That is what India is doing. And I have a feeling that if there is some hope, if there is a glimmer of hope, if there is some light at the end of the tunnel between these two countries, two important countries, then maybe that minor breakthrough, it could become into a big breakthrough later. Sergey Gore, what he has said, that India is going to be part of these two major initiatives, the Silica Pax initiative and the Critical Minerals initiative. And the very fact that Ashwini Vaishnav is already in the US, he's going in for those meetings. The very fact that the Europeans are now so closely interacting with us, I can bet you my bottom dollar, that the US is not ignoring all this. They are very cognizant of what is going on. And maybe in some capacity, the US administration, especially the US president, respects that India has shown it can be very tough, it can hold out. And maybe this is the beginning of the meltdown of this frigidness which centered the relationship, it starts melting down, becomes a little more warm, little more effusive. I'm not too sure if we can ever go back to the glory days when the Prime Minister and the President of the US walked hand in hand to the chants of stadiums of both the President and our Prime Minister. I'm not too sure it can ever happen again. But even if there is a working relationship, if the tariffs can be removed, if the trade deal can be signed, and it's kind of business as usual, well done. That would be great for both the countries, because at the end of the day, we still would like to think of America as a friend, as a fellow democracy, as a mature democracy from which maybe we also have a lot to learn, as a trusted partner, as a technological partner, as a place of innovation, a place of R&D, a place where there is so much in that cooperation which can come out from, in the terms of our skilled workers who are going to America, in terms of our children who go for higher studies, or for even for jobs. And if all that can come back in a steady way without all these big hugs and what we in India call the Juggi Bhasin kind of diplomacy, if it can be done, then well done. Then it's good going forward. But it's a wait and watch situation. At the moment, of course, honestly, on the ground, things don't look very rosy. Things don't look very hopeful. But then, as I said, like there were early straws in the wind at the beginning of the term of this president, when we knew things were going to go wrong, when they started calling India the tariff king. Now maybe some straws in the wind are picking up that things could start coming back to an even keel. Because remember what Sergio Gore, his latest statement is, that the trade deal talks are going to start on, that is tomorrow. He's talking about tomorrow, 13th January. Let's see what happens. Let's see how it goes out there. And so therefore, wait and watch. Let's be hopeful. Let's see how this entire thing pans out. It's wait and watch. But interesting times, as always, between India and the United States. And this very turbulent, very important, very significant, yet very, if I can use a word, a schizophrenic relationship. And on that note, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.